In the small, tight-knit town of Wilmore, Kentucky, everyone knew everyone. The kind of place where front doors were left unlocked and neighbors borrowed sugar without asking. That peace shattered one cold November morning in 1997 when Emily Harper disappeared. She was a 28-year-old mother, known for her kindness and calm demeanor. That morning had seemed normal. She had dropped off her 5-year-old son, Tyler, at the local daycare, exchanged brief words with one of the staff members, and drove away. It was the last time anyone would see her. Hours passed with no sign of her. Calls to her phone went unanswered. She didn't show up for her shift at the local library. By evening, concern turned to panic. Daniel Harper, her husband, reported her missing that night. He told police she had never returned home. He seemed anxious, confused, and frustrated. The community quickly mobilized to search nearby woods, highways, and neighborhoods. The next morning, her silver sedan was discovered parked neatly by Lake Rowan, a quiet, isolated area just outside town. The car was locked. Her purse lay on the passenger seat. The keys were nowhere to be found. Speculation swept through the town. Some whispered that Emily might have run away. Others believed she had been taken. But the police didn't take long to focus on someone closer: her husband. Daniel had a history. Years ago, there were reports of loud arguments at their home. One neighbor claimed to have seen Emily crying in her backyard weeks before the disappearance. Another said Daniel had a jealous streak. These statements formed the basis of the investigation. Even though there were no police reports, no signs of the struggle, no blood, and no body. As days passed, suspicion hardened into accusation. Detectives interviewed Daniel multiple times. His timeline, while consistent, had small gaps. He said he was home all day working on his truck. He had no alibi for that morning. A retired schoolteacher claimed she saw a red pickup truck, similar to Daniel's, near Lake Rowan around the time Emily vanished. That sighting became central to the case. The pressure mounted quickly. The media latched onto the story, painting Daniel as a controlling husband with a dangerous temper. Emily's family, devastated and confused, grew distant from Daniel. Her sister, who had never liked him, gave tearful interviews saying she believed Daniel was responsible. Within a month, he was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. Even though Emily's body had not been found, the trial was swift and brutal. The prosecution leaned heavily on character evidence and circumstantial claims. The jury heard about Daniel's temper, his past arguments, and his motive rooted in jealousy. No physical evidence was ever presented. No murder weapon, no DNA, no trace of Emily's body. But the emotional weight of the case and the public desire for closure led to a unanimous verdict. In the spring of 1998, Daniel Harper was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. He was just 32. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read. Daniel's face was blank, as if the reality had not yet settled in. Tyler, now living with his aunt, would grow up believing his father had murdered his mother. Emily's disappearance was considered solved, and Wilmore returned to its slow rhythm, the case closed, the mystery buried beneath the quiet surface of Lake Rowan. Prison life began for Daniel Harper, with cold metal doors and the clang of keys echoing through narrow hallways. The noise never stopped. The days were rigid, structured around meals, head counts, and endless waiting. Inmates came and went, fights broke out, guards barked orders, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, Daniel tried to survive. He wasn't the kind of man built for prison, but he had no choice. His freedom was gone. His son had been taken from him. His name had been ruined. The world had decided who he was, and no one cared if it was wrong. At first, Daniel held out hope that someone would realize the mistake. He believed the police would find new evidence, or that Emily would walk through the door and prove he was innocent. But as the years passed, that hope withered. His appeals were all denied. The same witnesses who had testified during his trial stood by their original statements. The same gaps in the investigation were brushed aside. The legal system had labeled him a murderer, and no one wanted to admit they might have been wrong. He tried to keep to himself inside the prison walls. He avoided trouble, didn't join any prison gangs, and spent his time reading. He became obsessed with law books, studying wrongful convictions, forensic failures, and procedural errors. At night, he wrote letters, hundreds of them, to lawyers, advocacy groups, innocence projects, journalists, and even former police officers. Most never wrote back. A few responded with vague words of support, but offered no real help. Still, he wrote, because it was the only thing he had left. While time inside stood still, the world outside moved on. His son Tyler grew up without him, raised by Emily's sister in Tennessee. Daniel heard little about him. He received no photos, no letters, no phone calls. It was as if his entire existence had been wiped away, replaced by a single word: guilty. News of Emily's disappearance faded from public memory, replaced by new headlines and fresh scandals. Eventually, even the guards forgot the details of why Daniel was there. To them, he was just another inmate. What Daniel never forgot was the feeling of being silenced. Every time he saw his reflection in the scratched prison mirror, he remembered. The courtroom, the reporters, the stares from the jury. He remembered the way the prosecutor had described him, how easily people believed he was capable of killing the woman he loved. That betrayal haunted him. Not just from the system, but from everyone who had once called themselves his friends, his neighbors, his family. Then after 22 years, something changed. A nonprofit legal group in Louisville took a second look at his case. They had come across his letters and were struck by the gaps in the evidence. They found that the star witness who claimed to have seen his truck had changed her story multiple times. They discovered that the police never confirmed the identity of the truck seen at the lake. Worse, they learned that the original defense team had failed to challenge key pieces of circumstantial evidence. After months of reviewing the case, the group filed a motion for Daniel's conviction to be vacated. The state resisted at first, but could not deny the flaws in the original investigation. In early 2020, a judge overturned Daniel's conviction. The courtroom that had once sentenced him to life now set him free with a few quiet words and no apology. He walked out of the prison gates with nothing but a garbage bag filled with personal items and the clothes on his back. There was no parade, no news cameras, no one waiting. Daniel had lost over 2 decades of his life. He had entered prison at 32. Now he was 54, gray-haired, and alone in a world that had moved on without him. But he was free. And in that freedom, a new question began to form, one that would soon shatter everything he thought he knew. Asterisk. Daniel spent the first few months of freedom in silence. He moved into a small one-bedroom apartment provided by a re-entry program for exonerated prisoners. It had old furniture, flickering lights, and smelled faintly of mildew. But to Daniel, it was a palace. The mattress was soft. The door wasn't locked from the outside. He could walk outside whenever he wanted and breathe fresh air without anyone watching him. But freedom came with its own weight. The world had changed in ways he couldn't grasp. Smartphones, electric cars, digital everything. Even the way people talked seemed different. He felt like a visitor in someone else's future. Daniel tried to find work, but most employers turned him down the moment they searched his name. Even though he was legally cleared, the internet still held on to the old headlines. Husband convicted of killing wife. It didn't matter that the case had been thrown out. His face was still tied to a crime he didn't commit. He ended up doing odd jobs, cleaning yards, fixing fences, washing windows just enough to afford food and keep the lights on. Some days, he walked for hours, trying to feel connected to the world again. One afternoon, in the late spring of 2025, Daniel decided to visit a farmer's market in Covington. He had no particular reason for choosing that place, only that he'd never been there before. It was sunny and crowded, children running between stands of strawberries and baked bread. For the first time in a long while, he felt almost normal. That was when he saw her. She walked past him casually, holding the hand of a young girl. Her dark hair was pulled back and she wore sunglasses, but Daniel's eyes locked onto her instantly. His breath caught in his throat. The lines of her face, the curve of her mouth, the way she tilted her head when she listened, it was all there. It was Emily. He stood frozen, staring. She didn't notice him. She moved with ease, chatting softly with the girl beside her, who looked around 8 years old. A man was with them, pushing a stroller. He kissed the woman's cheek, and she smiled. They were a picture-perfect family. No tension, no fear, no sign of a past shattered by tragedy. Daniel's mind raced. He had spent 22 years in a prison cell for her death. He had been labeled a murderer. His son had grown up thinking he was a killer. And yet here she was, alive, surrounded by children and love. He couldn't make sense of it. He followed them discreetly through the crowd, heart pounding, trying to convince himself that he wasn't seeing things. They walked to an SUV and loaded their groceries into the back. Daniel crouched behind another vehicle, snapping photos with an old phone he had picked up from a pawn shop. He captured her face, the license plate, the man beside her. He watched them drive off, his hands shaking. This wasn't grief or confusion. It was something deeper, a collapse of everything he thought he knew. That night, Daniel didn't sleep. He stared at the photos over and over again, comparing them to the few surviving images he had of Emily from their life together. There was no question, it was her. She hadn't been murdered. She had disappeared. And for reasons he didn't yet understand, she had let the world believe she was dead. She had let him take the blame. The next morning, Daniel began searching for answers. He traced the license plate number, dug through public records, and searched every available database. It led him to an address in a quiet Indiana suburb. The name on the property records wasn't Emily Harper. It was Emily Carter. A new identity, a new life, a lie wrapped in a second chance. And for the first time since walking out of prison, Daniel didn't feel free anymore. He felt trapped in a new kind of cage, one built not of iron bars, but of betrayal. Daniel couldn't rest until he understood the full truth. The discovery of Emily's new identity wasn't enough. He needed to know how she had pulled it off, why she had done it, and most importantly, how she had let him rot in prison for over 2 decades. He took the little money he had saved from his odd jobs and hired a private investigator named Howard Trask. Howard was a quiet man in his 60s. Once a police officer, now a seasoned investigator who specialized in cold cases and missing person fraud. When Daniel showed him the photos and explained what he had uncovered, Howard didn't hesitate. Something wasn't right, and he wanted to know what. Within weeks, Howard began to unravel the mystery. He accessed public records, spoke with people in the Indiana suburb, and tracked down Emily Carter's employment and financial history. The pieces began falling into place, like parts of a puzzle that had been deliberately scattered. Emily Harper had not just vanished. She had carefully erased herself. She'd started by using a stolen identity shortly after Daniel's conviction. The first trace of Emily Carter appeared in Missouri in 1999, just months after Emily was declared missing. From there, she moved between several states using slightly altered names, always keeping a low profile, never staying anywhere for more than a couple of years. Howard found documents showing that Emily eventually settled in Indiana under a fully fabricated background. She worked under-the-table jobs until she acquired a fake Social Security number. In 2004, she legally changed her name to Emily Carter using forged papers. By then, she had created a new life story, telling friends and co-workers that she had escaped an abusive marriage. No one ever questioned her. She had married a man named Richard Carter in 2005. Their wedding photos showed a smiling couple in a small backyard ceremony. In 2006, she gave birth to a daughter named Lily. There was no mention of her past, no clues that she had once lived a completely different life under a different name. She had severed all connections and never looked back. Daniel was stunned by the depth of her deception. Everything had been planned right down to the vehicle by the lake, the purse left behind, the missing keys. It was all meant to create the illusion of disappearance. But the one thing she hadn't counted on was how thoroughly the justice system would run with that illusion. She hadn't framed Daniel directly, but she didn't stop it either. She let the police create their own version of the story, and she stayed silent while they destroyed his life. Howard tried to confront her discreetly. He visited her neighborhood, pretending to be a census worker. When she opened the door, he took note of her reaction. There was a flicker of recognition, a moment of panic, quickly buried under a smile. She denied everything, claimed to be someone else, said she had never heard the name Daniel Harper in her life. Howard didn't push. He took what he needed and left. Armed with this new evidence, Daniel went to the local police and demanded that they reopen the case. But the response was lukewarm. Legally, Emily had not committed a prosecutable crime. There were no charges for faking her own death. There were no penalties for letting a wrongful conviction stand. Since there was no proof that she had actively framed Daniel, there was nothing they could do. Daniel contacted a lawyer to consider filing a civil suit, but the odds weren't in his favor. The legal system had failed him once, and now it was failing him again. Emily remained untouchable. She moved out of her Indiana home just a week after Howard's visit, taking her new family with her and leaving no trace of where she had gone. It was as if she had vanished a second time, only now Daniel knew better. He sat alone in his apartment, staring at the manila folder filled with reports, photos, and timelines. He had proof of the truth, but no way to use it. Emily had stolen years from his life and walked away clean. And for the first time since she disappeared, he realized he might never be able to hold her accountable, not in court, not in the public eye, and not even with the truth on his side. Daniel didn't give up, but he understood now that justice wasn't coming from the courtroom. The system had already closed the book on his story, labeling him a freed man and moving on without ever acknowledging the price he paid. His innocence was a technicality, not a vindication. No one had apologized. No restitution was offered. He had lost his 20s, his 30s, and most of his 40s behind bars, watching time slip by through steel bars and concrete walls. The man who had entered prison, young and full of confusion, had come out older, lonelier, and deeply fractured. He tried to rebuild what he could. He reached out to his son Tyler, now in his early 30s. Their first meeting was awkward. Tyler had grown up believing his father was a murderer. Reconnecting was like trying to build a bridge over a canyon that had been carved over years of lies and silence. They spoke over coffee in a small diner. Tyler was cautious, polite, but distant. Daniel explained everything about the overturned conviction, the discovery of Emily, the new identity, the photos, the investigators' findings. Tyler listened, but he didn't say much. At the end of the meeting, he said he needed time. That time never turned into a second conversation. Daniel never heard from him again. With no legal recourse, Daniel went public. He contacted local journalists, some of whom remembered the case from the 90s. One small newspaper agreed to run a story. Then a regional TV station picked it up. Soon, larger outlets came calling. Daniel stood before cameras, holding up the pictures of Emily alive, happy, thriving. He spoke calmly, without rage, about the years he lost and the silence he endured. The media buzzed with the shock of it all. Viewers were stunned. A man convicted of killing his wife had not only been wrongly imprisoned, but had proof she had started a new life while he sat behind bars. Some saw Daniel as a tragic figure, a victim of a failed system. Others questioned his motives, asking why Emily had left, what secrets the marriage might have held. The internet, with all its noise, exploded into debate, but none of it changed the facts. Emily was alive. She had disappeared intentionally. She had not corrected the record, and she had left behind a man who suffered the full weight of a crime that never happened. Despite the headlines, there were no arrests, no official actions. Emily, now vanished again, seemed to disappear more efficiently this time. She left behind no digital footprint, no forwarding address. It was like she had evaporated. The new family, her husband Richard and daughter Lily, were never charged or accused. They likely had no idea who she really was. Daniel suspected they were victims in a different way, living inside a lie they never agreed to. The attention Daniel received eventually faded. Other stories filled the news cycle, and his face disappeared from screens. He returned to his quiet life, more invisible than ever. The public had moved on, just as the justice system had, just as Emily had. He walked the streets with the knowledge that the truth had been revealed, but had changed nothing. Sometimes, he sat on park benches, watching families pass by, wondering how different things could have been. He had once imagined growing old with Emily, watching Tyler grow up, maybe even retiring in a small house with a garden. But those dreams were buried under 22 years of steel and silence. There were no second chances, only echoes of what might have been. Daniel didn't seek revenge. He didn't try to track Emily down again. He had seen what she was capable of, and that knowledge haunted him more than any punishment ever could. In the end, his story became a warning that justice is not always about truth, and sometimes the deepest betrayal comes not from a stranger, but from the one person you trusted the most.